Clara, did the energy markets told us a few weeks ago that the worst was behind us, and it seems like they got it wrong. What is the price action reflecting to you about the current state of affairs of what's happening in the Middle East?
For me, one of the biggest takeaways in what we're seeing with oil prices right now is just the degree of uncertainty that we're seeing on still a day-to-day basis. Because this is another week in which energy markets have remained incredibly fragile. And yet, even so, we've seen resilience, adaptation coming from a number of fronts. I think one of the challenges that we're dealing with is now we're talking about a situation that's not just an ongoing conflict, it's a conflict that's expanding on multiple fronts with implications for markets.
Yeah, what are the implications? One of the things, Clara, that we've been talking about is, watching China, how they are increasingly embracing other forms of energy. They want to not be beholden to the world when it comes to their energy needs. And that's whether it's nuclear, whether it's alternative energy, like we see that. I do wonder, when we think more broadly about energy, and we're still very reliant on fossil fuels, but longer term, Saudi Arabia, the whole region, Middle East, they are thinking about life after fossil fuels, aren't they?
I'm not sure yet if countries are thinking about life after fossil fuels, but I do think increasingly we're seeing questions about life after peak oil, or at least the kind of reliance on oil that we've seen in previous years. A big part of this and what we've seen in the number of adaptations over the last few months is this kind of rising interest and focus on electrification, on vehicles, on other things that can help curb that demand for oil. It's certainly something that has also factored into Saudi Arabia's thinking as well on multiple aspects of its energy security strategy. And for that reason, I think also influences how it thinks about its remaining export potential. Mm-hmm. But the reason I'm hesitant to say that we're in a world that's thinking beyond or kind of post fossil fuels yet is some of the broader things that we've seen on this front. One of the questions is, of course, what we've seen with natural gas trade, where I think some of the stories continue to be more mixed and there are questions there. But I also think quite a bit about coal demand as well, where you have, for example, in response to this crisis and rising demand for electricity, Asia really increasing its consumption of coal to make up for that gap it's had in tight LNG markets. And so longer term, a question is, do we see that sustained? Clearly, multiple economies, not just China, but you also have Vietnam and others, have been thinking about that transition to greater use of renewable energy sources. They were thinking about that pre-Hormuz as well. So there is a question of how much more they can do and what as they see as their most challenging sources of potential system strain.
Yeah, well, coal for now is easier than some of the renewables you talk about and perhaps some of the nuclear because you can just increase what you're actually doing when it comes to coal. What are the long-term implications if there is a higher reliance on coal in some of those countries you mentioned?
There are a couple of implications of longer term reliance on coal. And I'll say it's not just that coal is easier. It's in some case the capacity is just already in place and underutilized. If you continue to utilize it, and so why has it been underutilized? What are the risks of if it's utilized at a greater degree over the long term? We talk a lot about air pollution in particular, which the Asia Pacific region in particular has really been front and center. We've all seen the stories of years and years of really toxic air pollution out of Beijing, New Delhi, elsewhere. I think that's one of the implications. Another is we often talk about coal as this sort of low-cost source of energy. We talk about it as something that's domestically abundant. We are seeing more and more across the region, both rising prices on coal and rising requirements for coal imports as well to meet those needs. So there's a little bit of a geopolitical concern there as well.
Wait, so more demand for coal, you're saying, in general, or what? I'm sorry. I think I kind of missed the point here. Yeah.
Absolutely. In the near term, we're already seeing more demand for coal, more than both today and more than our expectations that already saw demand for coal rising in South and Southeast Asia as well. But beyond just kind of the near-term shock, there are things that I'm watching now where it's going to be interesting to see what actually moves forward or does not.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's been some reporting on Vietnam of questions of if it is considering new construction of coal-fired power plants. It is not the only one across the region that has had trouble, not just in questions of reducing its use of existing plants, but holding off on additional builds.
Right.
And that's something that could further incentivize demand higher.
So I think about your senior fellow for climate and energy. So how do you think about all of this in terms of the global climate picture going forward in a year where certainly here in the US, we've been dealing with smoke coming down from wildfires in Canada, extreme weather, again, whether it's water or heat. So I'm just curious, as you watch the global energy picture and what's going on there and what it means for global climate, how do you tie it all together? Is it worrisome?
It's worrisome. And I would also say that it is a bit of a mixed story because you have seen already a number in the region who, in the response to this ongoing global energy market shock, have talked about the increased use of nuclear energy, earlier restarts or new builds. They've talked about their greater ambitions for not just the renewable energy sources that we think about, so wind and solar, but also biofuels and other alternatives as well. So I think these are all great trends, but I think they do not fully eliminate my concern about, one, the potential for rising use of coal. And in turn, even with greater progress, I think we still do have those real serious growing challenges of the reasons rising carbon emissions and the challenges that creates not just for individual communities in the region, but for global action at large.
We just have 10 seconds and I want to end where we began, and that's with oil prices and just your prediction as we get into the fall. Are we going to stay around $100 a barrel?
I think we are still in an environment where there are so many uncertainties. We are wondering if the price point that we're at now is sustainable.
Okay.
And if some of the things, I would love to know too.